Copyright Stanford University, all rights reserved.
Started. You got mic'd up before. Okay, everybody. Let's see if we can, get collected back in your seat again for us to continue this next installation of the exciting CVI Retreat Talks. And so our next speaker, again, needs no introduction since everybody's well known. Mark Nicolls, who's the Chief of Pulmonary Division here at Stanford, and he is an associate professor in pulmonary critical care and has previously trained at Stanford for his medical school as well as residency, and followed by a pulmonary fellowship at University of Colorado, and is the director for the Stanford Remodel Airway Tissue Bank, as well as a co-founder for the Northern California Scleroderma Research Consortium, as well as the external advisory board for the ASCI Society. And he is going to talk to us about the future of pulmonary critical care at Stanford. So thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Sean. And I want to thank Joe for inviting me to talk. I think my charge is a little bit different. Pulmonary critical care it doesn't neatly fit within the Cardiovascular Institute, but we have a lot of interesting overlap. And one of the things that I really like about Stanford is that even though it's really small, because it's small, it invites cross-disciplinary collaboration. And I think you'll see examples of that as we go forward. The outline of my talk today is to talk briefly about an overview of the PCCM programs and our projected growth. And I mean this mainly in intellectual and in the broadest clinical sense. I won't be going into the details that you heard earlier this morning. Joe asked me to focus on projects, fundings, and collaboration. Again, I'm going to be emphasizing mainly research. And what I'm going to be organizing the talk around is to highlight investigators, mainly our up-and-coming junior investigators. This is not an inclusive list, so I don't want anybody to be offended if they were inadvertently left off. And we've doubled the size of our faculty in the last 4 years. We have about 22 faculty evenly divided between the 3 lines, and I think we've got a lot of synergies with the CVI right now. So if you look at our clinical programs, PCCM has many out branches. We currently are responsible for staffing about 50% of the ICUs at Stanford. And we have a new interventional pulmonary program, which I'll discuss, which is tied to a growing lung cancer program that we're developing. General pulmonary, I've kind of arbitrarily lumped lung development and outcomes research under this rubric, which, as Sean and I were just talking about, sometimes disciplines just like subspecialties and service lines don't fit very neatly. I'll be talking briefly about the Center for Advanced Lung Disease, which we started in 2011, which has been very successful, and our pulmonary hypertension program, which I think is world-class. We see a lot of research growth in the upcoming 5 years, and I will highlight some of the individuals that I think are responsible. And I don't mean to be egocentric by starting on myself, but I did. So we have 2 major areas of research in our laboratory: lung transplantation and pulmonary hypertension. We are very interested in the intersection between immunity and the microvasculature. We have a pet theory, which we are promoting, that the reason why patients develop chronic rejection in solid organ lung transplantation is because when you reject the lung parenchyma, you not only reject the tissue itself, but you reject the blood vessels which supply blood. And we look at chronic rejection as a wound healing fibrotic response. So we focus on HIF-1 alpha as a way of understanding this process, and also as a new therapeutic tool to prevent chronic rejection from recurring. This is a new R01 that was just funded. I work very closely with Marlene Rabinovich on many projects. I was very fortunate to be included by Marlene on her PO1 grant, which focuses on the neutrophil elastase inhibitor elephant in airway microvascular health and rejection, with a view, again, to preventing chronic rejection. And I think one thing I'll say is an interesting subject for the next 5 years for the CVI and heart transplantation is actually addressing the innate immune response, as this project does and others in this PO1 grant, as well as the adaptive immune response, which is what we've been doing for the last 3 decades with marginal success. Joe Su in the laboratory, who's a young faculty member, studies why Aspergillus is prone to invade tissues in transplant, and he's the recipient of a new Parker B. Francis Award, which in our world is highly predictive of academic success. About 85% go on to independent science careers as clinician investigators. We also have a new therapeutic protocol for reversing established fibrosis, which in transplantation is a big deal. This is actually replacing diseased fibrotic stiff tissue by actually softening the tissue matrix with well-tolerated therapeutics. Our other area of interest, as I mentioned, is pulmonary hypertension. We believe that autoimmune injury is a significant contributor to this, and we focus on leukotriene B4. I have a superstar in my group, Amy Tian, working with Jin Kian, who's helped develop this. This is a new R01 that starts in December. And we also got into this field by trying to understand why pulmonary hypertension might develop because of abnormal regulatory T-cell activity. RASA leads this, and this was a new R56 award that was awarded in September. Unfortunately, in pulmonary hypertension research, animal models don't work well. The mouse models don't work well. So we've created a transgenic model of pulmonary hypertension involving a heterozygous defect in BMPR2, which is the gene defect responsible for most patients with familial, or associated with most patients that have familial pulmonary hypertension. We also have a very promising score, which will likely get funded in the spring, which is a large R01, which is a joint PI grant with Marlene and Mike Schneider, looking at emerging omic technologies and big data integration, working with Atul Butte as well and Purvesh Katra. I also lead an NIH multi-center trial, 16-center trial, looking at the treatment of scleroderma PH with rituximab. So this is the first immune therapy trial in the world, as far as I know, that looks at how using immune modulation might reverse this disease. And last week we got major funding from the NIH to do new mechanistic studies. Venancio de Jesus Perez is a very talented investigator in PH who studies endothelial parasite interactions in pH. For those of you who were at the AHA meeting this year, he as mentor, and K1 is very talented, a postdoc in his lab, won the 2014 Kernand and Comro Award. He works closely with Joe Wu and Marlene on this, has a K08 PHA Award and Amos Foundation Award. His new investigations examined Wnt signaling and VEGF-mediated pulmonary angiogenesis. He has funding for this from the ALA and AHA postdoctoral awards. He is also developing pharmacologic modulation using novel inhibitors, working with Jay Rajadas and Mark Smith, and I'll highlight Jay Rajadas a little bit later. Etta Spiekerkotter also works in pulmonary hypertension and right ventricular failure. Working with Marlene, had a spectacular paper out in JCI last year, which has already been cited more than 25 times, which is in our basic science world is pretty amazing. She worked with Phil Beachy to screen thousands of FDA-approved drugs to find out agents that might be beneficial for vascular health by upregulating BMPR2 signaling, and found that low-dose FK506, the drug that we use in our transplant patients, was actually the most efficacious and has had a lot of interest from the FDA and already has a clinical trial with Roham Zaminian exploring this. She has multiple collaborators within our community and is well-funded with a K08 CVI seed grant, Spark funding, and she is also a Wall Center scholar. Roham Zaminian is an outstanding clinician investigator, MCL, who is translating our bench basic discoveries and biomarkers into human disease. I already mentioned the collaborations with Etta. He also works with our group in looking at leukotriene B4. as well as the proteomics core that I'll describe in a bit. He also has his own interests in terms of hemodynamics and studying mismatching in response to acute inhaled and systemic vasodilators. I mentioned that I can't talk about everyone today, but I will highlight Christina Kudelko, who's in charge of education for the Wall Center. It's an outstanding clinician investigator. I think Roham has put together the best pulmonary tissue biobank, and I know that he is looking for collaborations within the CVI. He's well funded with UO1, PO1, and CMREF funding. We have probably the best pulmonary vascular center, I think, in the country. I think that statement could be well defended. We have the $35 million Vera Milton Wall Center with Mark Krasnow as the executive director. I didn't put it on the slide, but Marlene Rabinovich is the science director. I want to make the announcement at this retreat, it is a retreat, that we have lots of, well, not lots, but we have sizable seed grants available, and we are seeking interdisciplinary researchers for pulmonary vascular disease projects. I also want to make the announcement that the Wall Center is going to have a national symposium in the fall of 2015 to coincide with the American College of Rheumatology meeting focusing on immunity in PAH, which should be very exciting. We also have a relatively new K-12 fellowship that Marlene, Mike Schneider, and I helped direct. We have fellowships that are currently available. This provides MDs and PhDs interested in emerging omic technologies and pulmonary vascular disease a great opportunity to get K-level funding, stay at Stanford, and transition to independent funding. I'm not sure if everybody's aware that we have the largest NHLBI proteomics center in the country for systems biology, and the focus is on immunity and pulmonary hypertension. This is led by Gary Nolan. There's 5 projects. The first one led by Marlene, myself, and Roham. Marlene's the PI on this project, looking at dysregulated immune responses in PH. Gary has, as you know, I think most people know, has developed mass cytometry into a real science, and he's applying this, working with Marlene, to pulmonary hypertension. Bill Robinson, antibody expert, has developed some spectacular diagnostic tests for PH, and PJ Utz is looking at cytokines, chemokines, growth factors in PH, and Chris Kodatic in Florida is looking at peptoids in PH. So a lot of interesting collaborations are available and occurring here. I mentioned that we have something called the Center for Advanced Lung Disease, which we started in 2011. This has several arms. The lung transplant, heart-lung transplant arm is led, the clinical director of this program is Gundeep Dhillon. He, like Alan was mentioning, Kieran Cush is looking at optimization of donors and also the lung allocation system, which is severely flawed. He has new papers out in the AJT and a pending paper in our Blue Journal talking about the outcomes of the LAS system and how we need to reform this. He also is involved with Jason Christie's UPenn study with primary graft dysfunction, and also has a very large lung transplant biospecimen repository, again, ideal for collaborations, that banks a large amount of bronchiolar lavage, lung tissue, blood samples from lung transplant recipients and explanted lung banking. Paul Moabir is another arm of our Center for Advanced Lung Disease. He leads the cystic fibrosis program. We have the largest adult cystic fibrosis program on the West Coast. He focuses on massive hemoptysis, risk factors for dying on the waiting list for lung transplantation, and he has a large Hearst Foundation award looking at modulators of the CFTR protein. I'll do a little sidebar here. Interstitial lung disease is interesting that Paul runs these trials with a pirfenidone, which is an anti-fibrotic drug that is just being approved by the FDA, and nintedanib, which is a TKI inhibitor in IPF. I mention these 2 trials because this was the big news at the American Thoracic Society meeting, the thought that we can actually start to reverse fibrotic lung diseases. And one of the things that I think will be interesting for us as a community in the next 5 years is that we're well positioned on the peninsula with biotech and UCSF to really start to think about remodeling tissue. And I think it's relevant to the type of stem cell work that Joe does, where we We have very stiff tissues that we're trying to put stem cells, introduce stem cells, and we need to have drugs that prepare the bed to receive these stem cells. So I think that this will be a very rich area for research in the upcoming years. Tushar Desai is kind of a rock star scientist. He has 2 recent Nature papers. He works in developmental biology, looking at epithelial development, its relationship to lung cancer. He does a lot of work with macrophage phenotyping, aging, emphysema. He's branching out into interstitial lung disease. He has broad collaborations with the university and is currently funded by BioX and ITI grants. One of our exciting recruitments last year, we got one of the busiest interventional pulmonologists in Manhattan to come to Stanford to start up our interventional pulmonary program. He's really developed wonderful relationship with our thoracic surgery colleagues and the lung cancer program, and has developed 2 major initiatives, one Stanford Innovation in Lung Knowledge and the Stanford Knowledge Evaluation Program. So we're really expanding our tissue banking and our involvement with the detection of abnormal nodules that we can actually get at with scopes that we couldn't get at before. And along those lines, we're bringing on Ryan Van Wert in technology innovation. He's very prominent within biodesign. He's involved with the novel medical device for real-time sampling of peripheral lung nodules, quantification of emphysema as a risk factor for pneumothorax, and he's got us involved with the Liberate trial, which is a multi-center trial where we actually do endobronchial lung volume reduction for emphysema. This just shows the promise of what interventional pulmonary medicine can do. Jay Rajadas, recently of neurology, has been brought in to the pulmonary division, and he is the director of BioADD. As Joe Wu knows very well, he's been absolutely valuable in developing novel formulations, targeted drug delivery, and therapeutics. He has numerous collaborations throughout the medical school, notably involving improving stem cell survival, looking at apelin and erythropoietin signaling in heart failure and neurologic disorders. He helps repurpose drugs for the treatment of chronic infections and is developing novel therapies for Lyme disease. He has collaborators in all the major departments, including Jeff Gertner, the 2 Joe Woos, Irving Weissman, Helen Blau, and others. And he has multiple sources of funding. Vish Nair is fortunate enough, again like Joe Wu, to have Sam Gambhir as his mentor. He is helping us develop our lung cancer presence, and I see lung cancer as being one of the most important initiatives for the pulmonary division to integrate better with the cancer center line and the lung oncologists. He's looking at circulating tumor cells to detect lung cancer, building new models of lung cancer risk. I think Ellen already mentioned the baseline study, which Sam is involved with, and we're helping coordinate the VA efforts with lung cancer. He is well-funded currently with a longevity award and applying for his K. One of the very happy recruits we made last year was Angela Rogers from the Brigham. She is interested in applied genomics in the ICU. She's building a very large ICU biobank of plasma. She just was awarded a new K23 award looking at metabolic changes in subjects who develop ARDS and assessing metabolic responses to injury. She just got a very competitive ATS award on top of that K23 to examine that. She has a very rich collaboration with Ian Ashley's lab and is applying his techniques to ICU diseases like sepsis and ARDS. Joseph Levitt is another K23 ICU clinical investigator looking at the identification and treatment of early lung injury. And so he is very interested in phenotyping ARDS patients, understanding why ARDS patients die, and intervening early. Finally, Nair Kazini is our outcomes person in our group. And she has multiple publications in the Annals of Internal Medicine, PLOS, et cetera, that look at pandemic modeling. She has been consulted for the CDC the New York Public Health in predicting their pandemics with flu seasons, and she's working with us and is a vital member of our outcomes group. So this is my last slide. These are the projected PCCM growth areas over the next 5 years. We see that critical care, interventional pulmonary lung cancer, pulmonary hypertension, and all of the fields that are associated with the Center for Advanced Lung Disease. So that's ILD, lung and heart lung transplantation, cystic fibrosis, as growing tremendously in the next 5 years. And the way we hope to really create opportunities for this is by working very closely with SHC, and in order for us to bring on new people, again, as Alan was alluding to, space is a big issue, but also clinical opportunities. So we're saying yes to everything. We're expanding into East and South Bay satellite clinics. We have outreach clinics going down to Monterey, Fresno, Las Vegas. And I think the more we hear about the Emeryville Health Center, this is going to be an extremely exciting opportunity for us, particularly with pulmonary hypertension, interstitial lung disease, and interventional pulmonary. Then I think even more new but still an unknown is the Valley Care merger. This is going to provide a huge amount of clinical work, and this extent that we can leverage that for more research and academic possibilities and ways of bringing Stanford excellence to the whole Bay Area and healthcare is exciting. I'll stop there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mark, for the wonderful talk. And maybe we'll take one question from the audience. Anyone? Okay, great. Thank you, Mark.
Copyright Stanford University, all rights reserved.